Hello and welcome to this afternoon's webinar in which we're looking at the Progress for Providers tool in Reablement. My name's Jenny Pitts and I work for Ambry Associates, and we work in partnership with Helen Sanderson Associates in the area of Reablement. So just a little bit about myself. I've worked in social care for over 20 years, including over 10 years working in local authorities, and prior to that I worked in the independent sector managing a range of provider services. I became interested in the area of reablement as a result of work I was doing in relation to the transformation of social care and development of personalisation across services. So just to run through the areas I wanted to cover in this webinar. Firstly, just some of the background as to why we felt reablement was a key area to address for providers. And secondly, a summary of the key principles within a publication called the New Reablement Journey, on which the Progress for Providers tool is based. Thirdly, looking at the tool itself and the standards on which that is based. And I then just wanted to look at the national context and how this fits into some of the most recent publications. And lastly, we should have some time for questions and answers. Also, just a few words about terminology. We use the word reablement, but please bear in mind that I'm using this as quite a generic term, and it may also be referred to as enablement or re-enablement in some areas. Essentially, it refers to support to maximise a person's well-being and independence, usually but not always provided soon after a person is referred to social care support. Okay. So firstly, what were the drivers in why we chose to focus on the area of reablement? Well, we felt that the principles of personalisation around choice and control have had less impact on this area, and many people receiving short-term support are still subject to a one-size-fits-all approach with little ability to exercise choice and control. Many people too are not supported to increase their independence because they don't meet what can be quite restrictive eligibility criteria. Narrow definitions of independence are largely restricted to home care support with self-help daily living tasks, which, although important, are not holistic and don't always take a person-centred approach to independence and well-being. And lastly, a lack of integration with other parts of the service meant that many people who had benefited from short-term support but needed further long-term support were not enabled in a timely way to go on to have those other arrangements in place. Many people were either provided with a holding arrangement, meaning that more new people are coming into their lives with no choice on their part, or they continue to use the reablement service, meaning that the service's capacity to support more people becomes extremely limited. So those were some of the frustrations, I guess, that we were hearing voiced within a lot of areas. And just to look at what are the implications for providers in this. Well, increasingly we are seeing local authorities wanting to support more people to benefit from short-term services that increase their independence. And are looking to the independent sector in order to broaden the market of providers to work in partnership with the local authority, widening opportunities for people to have short-term support and increasingly offering more choice. In addition, I think there's generally a much greater focus on monitoring providers on whether or not they're supporting people to achieve outcomes, whether those are short or long or longer term outcomes, and that relates to all commissioned services. And also we would argue that all adult social care should be about promoting independence, and that there needs to be a much greater focus on using resources to achieve specific outcomes that reduce people's reliance on paid support. This may relate to very obvious skills such as being able to go to the shops or cook a meal independently, or it may be much more subtle, such as the person with a profound disability being supported to participate more in their own personal care tasks rather than always being a passive recipient. So reablement really does need to be everybody's business. Obviously there's challenges for providers as well in responding to these opportunities. And as mentioned earlier, moving to a business model that sees success as a reduction in support for a given individual is easy to sign up to in principle, but in practice may be more challenging. the difference between doing for and promoting independence needs to be fully understood, and this may require new skills and knowledge for staff who may previously have been more used to working in a caring for role. And that doesn't mean to say that the staff can't learn those new skills and approaches, but we need to be mindful of that. And of course, staff do need to be skilled in working in a person-centred way in order to appreciate what is important to the person and how best to support them to gain in independence and well-being. And of course, running right through the organisation, there must be a positive approach to risk and a thorough understanding of those issues. So those are some of the challenges, and we address some of those, or all of those in fact, in the Progress for Providers tool. So just to look at the new reablement journey, which, as I said, was written in response to many of these frustrations and really is the foundation to the Progress for Providers tool that we're going to be looking at. We wanted to pose some new thinking for reablement based on a much more person-centred and joined-up approach. In writing it, we were conscious that local services are structured and delivered in very different ways in different areas, so we shouldn't be prescriptive about the way support should be organised. What we chose to focus on, therefore, were some key principles that could be interpreted and implemented in different ways in different areas and by different types of organisations. So I'm going to summarise now the 8 key principles of the new reablement journey. And as I mentioned earlier, the reason why I think it's important to do this is that these principles underpin the standards within the Progress for Providers tool, and that will become evident later. So firstly, reablement is a journey and is not limited to 6 or 8 weeks. As I mentioned earlier, the term reablement can be confusing and is often used to describe a service rather than a process. If we think about reablement as a journey towards greater independence and well-being, then there's no reason at all why we should restrict this to 6 or 8 weeks. Many people can achieve short-term outcomes within that time frame, but many others will need longer, and we should be looking at medium and longer term goals as well as shorter ones. If we use this definition of reablement, then there's no reason why anybody should be denied support to be more independent based on their condition or circumstance. So reablement can be appropriate for anyone. As well as older people, this of course includes people with physical disability, learning disabilities, sensory impairment or mental health needs. The approach may not be always called reablement, and in fact in mental health services the term recovery is frequently used, but the concept is essentially the same. Thirdly, people should be able to self-direct how they are supported to achieve short and longer term goals around independence and be able to exercise as much choice and control as possible. This is a really important one and is an accepted principle for people who have a personal budget to achieve longer term outcomes, and we would argue this should also be the case when people are supported to achieve short-term goals around independence. It won't be exactly the same, as there may not be the same choice of providers offering short-term support, and it's unlikely that a person would employ a personal assistant with a direct payment only for a few weeks. But this doesn't mean that there aren't other ways that choice and control could be exercised. The person-centred thinking tools help to work out what is most important to the person and how they can best be supported, and it may not always be with paid support, but if it is, they should be able to determine what that support looks like. Fourthly, there should be one person-centred harvesting of relevant information. There is usually a lot of paperwork involved, particularly given the number of different agencies and professionals, and we need to really just focus on what is important and share this accordingly with the person's permission, rather than lots of people coming into their homes asking similar questions and multiple assessments going on without sharing. Many areas are now using one-page profiles to capture the really important information so that all people supporting the person know what's really important to them and how best to support them. The fifth principle is that support planning should include outcomes that strengthens a person's natural support networks and their community involvement. This obviously will support them to remain more independent for longer and will address the isolation that many people experience. The sixth principle is that people should own the planning process and be involved as much as possible rather than feeling that this is something that is being done to them and they have little control over what's happening. Feeling in control of what's happening, it will in itself help some people feel less disempowered. People should have information about the resources that are available to them. This may be information about what is going on in their local community, what aids, adaptations or telecare is available, or it might be the amount of funding that is available to achieve specific outcomes. And lastly, the 8th principle is that people have a seamless experience and don't feel passed from pillar to post, but have consistency and familiarity as much as possible. If there is a need for a handover between services or between providers, then we would argue that this should just be managed as sensitively as possible and the relevant information shared, of course, with the person's permission. So those are the 8 key principles. We've summarised what a high-level customer pathway could look like with this graphic. It shows how in a person-centred system these principles could be achieved. Importantly, this pathway covers the whole experience from referral to a local authority, and providers will be involved at different stages in different areas, and not everywhere will be operating an independence budget. But this term is used really just to refer to the financial resources that are available to achieve the outcomes around independence. You'll see that it also includes the need to plan very early on if it's expected that the person will require support beyond the short-term period. The planning for what that support should look like and the choices over who provides the support and how should start and involve during that reablement period rather than waiting till the end. The arrangements for putting a personal budget and a support plan in place should not then be onerous or lengthy. This customer pathway has actually been implemented in different areas, in different ways in different areas, but the essential principles are the same. So to move on now to the Progress for Providers tool, I think you'll see how the standards naturally fall out of the principles I've just summarised. Given the definition that we use of reablement, this self-assessment tool can be used by any organisation that supports people to be more independent, whether to achieve short or longer term goals. It complements other Progress for Providers tools that are available, such as those for delivering personalised services and working with people with dementia, and for delivering home care. So depending on the nature of your organisation and your contracting arrangements, you may need to select the sections that most apply to your circumstances. There are 8 sections, and the first is leadership and vision. In this section we look at, is the organisation's aim to reduce dependency on paid support reflected in its vision and strategy statements? And do these statements reflect the broader definition of independence and well-being that includes the importance of community networks? And importantly, again, as we mentioned earlier, does the organisation's business model reflect this vision? Many provider organisations will have had a business model that is based on supporting people for as long as possible. This has to be turned on its head if the approach is to support people for as short a time as possible, and that change needs to be owned throughout the organisation. The business model may need to change to become one that is based more on supporting a larger number of people but for a shorter time. But that all really needs to be looked at. The second section looks at how person-centred the organisation's culture is, and is this reflected in everything that the organisation says and does? Does the organisation put people at the heart of everything it does? Importantly too, in promoting independence is the positive and person-centred approach to risk-taking, and we ask whether that is shared throughout the organisation and supported by at all levels. The third section looks at the community focus and asks whether the importance of community in promoting well-being and independence is fully acknowledged throughout the organisation, and whether partnership work in the community with community organisations is encouraged and supported at a local level, and do staff really understand that this is an important part of their role. And is this reflected in organisational documents such as job descriptions and so on? Fourthly, looking at short-term support planning and review. Our plans to achieve short-term outcomes may be called independence plans, reablement plans, or support plans. And this section addresses whether everyone supported has a person-centred plan, whatever we call it, to achieve independence goals, and whether this is reviewed regularly with the person. Some organisations may only be contracted for short-term periods, such as up to 6 or 8 weeks. And in these cases, the short-term plan needs to evolve to address longer-term outcomes if that support is required beyond that time. The next section looks at to what extent the organisation works in partnership with other agencies in the interests of the person. This may include health services, particularly if the person has had a stay in hospital or been unwell, or it may also include housing, welfare rights, education, leisure and so on. It also addresses partnership work with commissioners and purchasers, and we include self-funders within that description, and ask whether the organisation works to develop and sustain a relationship based on trust and real partnership. We then look at human resources and workforce development and ask whether support staff have the necessary skills and knowledge to be able to support the person to do more for themselves as opposed to traditional caring roles. It also asks whether staff have the opportunity to develop positive relationships with people they are supporting. And this is looking at the consistency of who a person is supported by, and whether rotas are organised in such a way that people experience familiarity as opposed to a different face every day. It also looks at whether supervision and appraisals consider how staff have supported people's independence, and whether there is a workforce development strategy that encompasses all these areas of the organisation's role in supporting staff to do this and to really understand and have those skills. We then look at marketing and communication and ask whether the organisation's role in promoting independence is fully explained in its promotional literature and media. Importantly too, do those supported and their families understand that the focus is on achieving goals, and therefore the support to do so, along of course with any funding resource, may be time limited. Managing expectations is a really important part of communicating well with people, so that they understand as much as possible the purpose, the nature and the longevity of their support. And this of course will help them feel in control of that if they know at the outset what to expect. And then lastly, we look at reviewing and improving services, and the extent to which the organisation uses the information that it collects from person-centred reviews to inform its understanding of its own performance and what may need to be done differently in order to continually improve. Similarly, are people who use or have used the service asked about their experience, and is their feedback used to continually improve how the organisation works? So those are the standards, and once you've self-assessed your organisation's performance against these, the next step is to develop an action plan summary that sets out what will be done in order to achieve the next statement in the section, moving all the time, of course, towards a level 5, which is regarded as excellence in each area. These are then prioritised to enable you to focus on more actions in more depth, and you address what areas you want to concentrate on first, who else needs to be involved, and the steps that you plan to take. Obviously this plan can then be reviewed and other actions are addressed over time. The self-assessment can of course be redone as regularly as you feel appropriate and progress monitored. So it gives you a really good tool to really organise what it is your organisation needs to do, what's the most important thing, and how are you going to go about doing it. It gives you a really good structure for some of that planning. And you'll find a lot more information on how to use the Progress for Providers tool on the website www.progressforproviders.org. And there's also a really helpful video on there of Helen explaining it in more detail and how to get the most out of it. So do have a look at that if you haven't already seen it. Just to move on now to look at the national context and how the standards I've described complement the national policy direction and best practice. The Caring for Our Future white paper came out last July and sets out a really clear vision for a reformed care and support system. And just a quote from the paper is that the new system will focus on people's well-being and support them to stay independent for as long as possible. And you'll notice there it doesn't say only where that is reablement support. It's not only for short-term periods. I think what is being communicated in the white paper is that this is seen as needing to run across all services, and therefore all providers need to become skilled in really promoting independence and well-being. So it needs to run across all services, I've said, and not just on narrow definitions of services that currently might get termed reablement. The reformed care and support system described in the white paper is underpinned by a number of principles which are very closely aligned to the standards within the Progress for Providers tool. So just to run through these quickly, the health, well-being and independence and rights of individuals are at the heart of care and support. People are treated with dignity and respect and are safe from abuse and neglect. People should have choice and control over their care and support. Carers are recognised as vital partners, and a caring, skilled and valued workforce delivers quality care and support in partnership with individuals, families and communities. This diagram from Caring for Our Future, and if we look at it in relation to short-term support, I think it illustrates how people's experience of reablement can often be in the current system. Often there is only one option, but even if there is just one provider organisation, people should still be able to exercise choice about how, when and with what they are supported. So the principles within Caring for Our Future make no distinction between short and longer term support. So we just need to interpret them for short-term reablement services, and the Progress for Providers tool, I think, does this. This next diagram shows the vision within Caring for Our Future, in which people have good information about a range of options available to them and are supported to make choices, have their views heard, and are in control of their support arrangements, and also have a range of high quality options and can choose a range of ways of meeting their achieving their support outcomes. Lastly, I think it's relevant to mention the recent Care Quality Commission report into home care, which is relevant too for services delivering reablement. These quotes, I think, just really illustrate the need for change, the lack of continuity and all too common experience of people having many different staff not feeling like a person, and the need to make sure monitoring of services and really finding out people's experience isn't just lip service. So I hope you'll see that by using Progress for Providers in reablement, you would be supporting your organisation to be fit for purpose now and in the future, and that you would have a tool to continually improve and monitor and shape that progress. So thank you ever so much for listening. Good luck in using the Progress for Providers tool. I'll put some contact details on the screen and come back to Kerry to see what questions you've got.
Thank you, Jenny. The first question that I have for you is, our organisation has won a tender to deliver reablement services, but the local authority seems to be using a very narrow definition of reablement, and the contract specifies that each visit to a person's home must be for no longer than 15 minutes. What scope do we have to work in a person-centred way?
Yeah, this whole area of the 15-minute calls is a very contentious issue, and was actually quite heavily criticised within the Caring for Our Future white paper, where it was seen as being a practice that didn't uphold people's rights and dignity, and it was felt that the outcomes that were desirable really could not be achieved within that 15-minute time frame. So I would really I suppose, understand the frustration. And my recommendation, my advice to you would be that you enter into a dialogue with your commissioners, if you can do that, going back to the standard of working in partnership and basing it on trust, and look and see whether they would be open to you still achieving the outcomes that they want to be achieved, but having more flexibility to do that in a more person-centered way, and not just being restricted by a certain limit on the time that people can spend in someone's home. I think as long as you feel that you're able to achieve the outcomes within the cost of the contract price, it's worth having that dialogue with them as to how the methods that you use to achieve those outcomes could be more person-centered, and maybe share with them some of the quotes within the white paper and some of the new thinking that's come about in the last 6 to 12 months, including the Progress for Providers tool. They just need reassurance that you will be delivering the standards and that people's needs will be met. So good luck on that one. It's not an easy one to take on. Okay.
Thank you. The next question is, where can I get a copy of the new Reablement journey?
We've got hard copies of this publication, which if you were to email Kerry at Helen Sanderson Associates, she could send you a copy, or if you have a look on the Helen Sanderson Associates website, you'll find a copy on there as well to have a look at. We've also, I should also say, there's also a checklist for organisations to look at their readiness to implement the standards within the new Reablement journey. So we can send you that as well if you're interested.
Thank you. The final entry is, my organisation supports adults with a learning disability, and in the past, when we have supported someone to be more independent in one area of their life, we have been able to use the resources that are freed up by giving them more one-to-one time for days out, etc. But the social worker now wants to reduce the person's funding, and we feel this is unfair as that is their entitlement.
I think this reflects, I suppose, the changing world of adult social care and a greater focus on outcomes within a climate of very tight financial budgets. Ultimately, a personal budget is an entitlement if the person still needs support to achieve those outcomes, and if through great practice your organisation has been able to support that person to become more independent, then I would say that actually, is that funding still required? So in the past, where you've been able to redirect the resources to do something else with the person, I think what you're going to need to do is really demonstrate to the social worker that that new activity is to meet an existing need that isn't currently fully met, or a new need to achieve a new outcome which may not have been identified before. I think we're now no longer in a time when money can just be used for more kind of luxury activities. And I'm not saying that it always is luxury to have one-to-one time with somebody, but ultimately, if you've been able to support somebody to be more independent, I feel that your organisation should celebrate that and should enter into a dialogue with the social worker about either how else that resource can be used for another person who may have a greater need, or simply you just celebrate that and that's a success for the organisation. And that's the changing business model, I think, that every organisation is going to have to work to, is celebrating a reduction in their own support. But that does mean, of course, I fully accept less income for the organisation. But on the back of that, your reputation will be stronger, because you'll have seen to have been achieving successes for people. And hopefully, you'll get more referrals in the future, and that will build the trust with the purchaser and the social worker as well. So I hope that's helpful. I would say sit down with the social worker and have that dialogue. Okay.
Thank you, Jenny. That's all of today's questions.
Okay. Well, thank you again very much for listening, and good luck with using the tool. Thank you.